Okay, good afternoon, members. Councillor Chris Hughes, we can start the meeting.
Diolch, Jane. Croeso, Prynhawn da all. Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Chris Hughes and I'm chair of the Social Care and Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to today's special meeting where we are all attending remotely. In addition to committee members, we also have non-committee members, cabinet members, officers and representatives of Betty Cadwallader University Health Board joining us to assist with our discussions today. For those viewing the live screen, committee members are identified with an asterisk next to their name. The meeting will be recorded and live streamed and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be made available through the council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and to choose your language of choice. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand function. You can also use the chat facility. All microphones will be muted. If you have indicated your intention to speak, you will be invited to turn your microphone on. If you leave your device for any reason, can you please ensure that you are muted and that you turn off your videos, please? Right, we move on to the agenda, and item 1 is apologies for absence.
Just 2 apologies, councillors Andrew Hinchcliffe and Dave Roberts.
Thank you. And item 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare the nature of their declared personal interests. Are there any interests? No? Okay, thank you all. Move on to item 3, which is urgent matters. I'm not aware of any. Jane, do we have any?
There are no urgent matters, Chair.
Thank you. And questions to cabinet members? I'm not aware that we've received any.
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. Right, item 5 is to receive a presentation on the orthopaedics programme by Mr. Keith Dibble from the interim planned care programme lead from Betty Cadwallader and Mr. Robert Crane, networks manager for orthopaedics. Well, welcome, Mr. Dribble and Mr. Crane. I don't know how are you going to do this, which one's going to go first, but when you address the committee, could you introduce yourselves, please, for the benefit of the online screening? Thank you.
And thank you, Chair. So my name is Keith Dibble. I'm the interim programme lead for Planned Care for Betsy Cadwallader Trust, and with me is Robert Kane, who's the orthopaedic network manager for that organisation. We're going to do a short presentation, if we may. Rob will start that off and I will conclude it, and then we'll allow enough time, I think, for some questions, if that's agreeable to the committee.
Yep.
So I'm going to hand over to Rob initially, and then we can, and if it suits the committee, we can take questions as we go along, or if you wish to do it at the end, we're quite flexible in that approach, whichever suits.
We'll try and leave until the end so that you can, because you may well answer many of the questions during your presentation.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Are we all seeing this?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've already been introduced. My name is Rob Kane. I'm the Orthopaedic and Musculoskeletal Network Manager for the Health Board. And I know that this meeting was, well, planned to take place, I think, over, well, a couple of years ago with my predecessor, Neil Windsor. So I'm hoping that we do cover, well, what was intended to be covered back then, but obviously a bit more of an update as to where we are now, because things are obviously very different. Okay. And then approximately halfway through, Keith will take over and follow the second bit of the presentation. So I can't see half of my presentation because there's pictures of a few of the councillors in the way, so I'm going to try and move you out of the way there. Okay, there we go. So the way I've structured this is I've talked about challenges, and it's not a long presentation, but hopefully it gets to the key points. Starting off with challenges, and then some of the initiatives that we've got going on in orthopedics, and then followed by some of the BCU plans and how we're going to tackle these challenges. Okay, I hope that's okay. So 2 years ago, before COVID started, we had roughly 2 years waiting list for normal elective, routine elective procedures in orthopedics. Okay, a lot has happened since then. It's magnified the situation. We are now looking at, unless we change anything, approximately 5 years until we're able to get back to business as usual, normal elective operative status as we were pre-COVID. Now, that is going to entail a few changes, which we're going to go on and talk about in a little while. There's also a few other challenges that people might not necessarily have thought about. I mean, there's the obvious ones regarding the waiting list, people waiting for surgery, people waiting for an appointment to see the orthopedic surgeon first time around. But there's also those patients that we don't know about yet, okay? Those patients that haven't been to the GP because they don't want to bother them because they think they're too busy. They haven't been to the GP because they're afraid to walk through the GP surgery door in case they contract COVID or something else that they haven't been exposed to over the past few years. There's also those patients that the GP has been reluctant to refer, not because they don't want to refer them, but because they don't know the state of the waiting list as such. There's a big cohort of these patients that we just don't know about because they haven't materialized yet, and they will. Okay, so these are all parts of our plans to take things forward and how we can manage this and how we can move forward and hopefully improve the services as we go. There's also a big category of patients that haven't been seen, who have had an operation, who we would normally see at routine stages post-op, but we haven't been able to because of cancellations, again, because of COVID and changes within the way that we're seeing people and the restrictions that we've had put in place as a result of the way that we've tried to get around the pandemic. And obviously, this has had an impact on how we take things forward as well. So in terms of initiatives, so these are sort of more service level changes taking place in different parts of the pathway for orthopedic patients, so to speak. So recently we had a Get It Right First Time visit. So this is what we call GIRFT, Get It Right First Time. This is an NHS England initiative to try and redesign services through in-depth reviews and benchmarking and the use of data-driven evidence to try and match services up and increase efficiency, increase effectiveness. We had a team, we did the visit virtually. We had a team that are based down in the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and this was on the 1st of February, and they had like I said, a virtual visit where we talked through all of our data and all of our services within orthopedics, all of our current challenges. And the idea is that they take that information away alongside lots of data that we've given to them already pre-visit, that they can analyze and come back to us with recommendations as to how we can take things forwards and improve. Those recommendations are due to come in the next month or two. Alongside that, we've got the National Orthopaedic Strategy Group, which is, for want of a better explanation, the Welsh version of GIRFT. Okay, this will look at our services and that of other health board orthopaedic services throughout Wales with a more of a Welsh slant to it, because the workings of the NHS in Wales are different from the NHS in England. So we need to look at it from a slightly different viewpoint. The recommendations from GIRFT might need to be shifted slightly to fit our mechanisms within the Welsh NHS. We are hopeful that the National Orthopaedic Strategy Group, which is Welsh focused, will allow us to do that better. We've also got a few other initiatives. One of those is provided by the British Red Cross, called Waiting Well. This is an initiative provider for patients that have been waiting over 2 years. So it's ideally placed for those longest waiting patients. So in other words, those with the greatest need because they've been waiting the longest. So one of the criteria set by the British Red Cross is that they need to be waiting over 2 years. The idea behind the service is that it's going to provide emotional support and regular contact for those patients. It is a limited resource, so we've had to prioritize it. Bear in mind, it's still in the procurement processes. It's a limited resource, so we need to use it where it's most needed. Currently our waits are the longest in the health board in orthopedics and in ophthalmology, so we're going to use it in those two services. Okay. That service should be quite effective in providing, like I said, emotional support and just some form of contact for those patients that largely have been just sat waiting for their procedures for quite a long time. We've also got a project in the east of the health board called Prehabilitation. This is a trial of 50 patients. It looks into exercise, nutrition, psychological supports, strength and conditioning, and it's a way of preparing patients better, specifically in this example for total knee replacements. Okay, and there's lots of evidence out there to show that prehabilitation reduces the length of stay in hospital post-op and increases their recovery in general post-op. Okay, and this trial is just to show that we can use it within our health board before hopefully it is rolled out into the other areas as well. Sorry, skip forward a page. So we've put some submissions into the Bevan Planned Care Innovation Programme. So Bevan Commission is a service that often puts out opportunities to try innovations or to scale up projects that you've already innovated with. This particular one is to try new ways of working. So we've put in 2 submissions this time around. One of those is to use expert physiotherapists to deliver services within orthopedic clinics, specifically to post-op review patients, and more so using patient-reported outcome measures to better direct that care. We've got lots of examples where we've already used both of these 2 services separately and very good outcomes from those. We're hoping to combine the 2 to create an innovative approach that we can use across the health board to reduce the backlog of patients waiting for appointments post-op. We've also got a lifestyle management program in place in BCU. The problem with the lifestyle management program more recently is that it's gone from 32 weeks of exercise and advice and support down to 16 weeks. This is a response to COVID. COVID has caused us to reduce from 32 to 16 because we're not able to take as many people on each program. So obviously we had to shorten each one to enable us to continue to deliver the same throughput. Fortunately, the success that we've seen in the past with the lifestyle management program, which showed that we could delay or reduce patients' need for surgery by 72%, was the last piece of evidence that we got through. So 72% of patients either decided to delay their surgery because they didn't feel they needed it at that point, or they didn't go on to have any surgery because they got stronger and more functionally able. Those outcomes are not coming through now that it's reduced by half from 32 to 16 weeks. So this next innovation through the Bevan Commission, we're hoping to have some support to take it back up to the original 32 weeks to get the same outcomes. Escape pain classes are virtual classes. Originally, they were face-to-face. This is a national program that's very well evidenced and very well data-driven throughout England, at least. And we've just taken it on within Wales, and BCU has recently commissioned it, and we've taken it from face-to-face to virtual for obvious reasons. And we're hoping to run both of those options in all of our venues. These are for hip and knee pain patients, not just post-op pain patients. So these are the front and the back end of the orthopedic pathway. The next 3 initiatives are based around what some of our local orthopedic surgeons have done. So we've had very good responses to the virtual joint school by Mr. Ganapathy in Ysbyty Gwynedd in Bangor. He's provided 12 short videos based around educating the patient pre-operatively. They're all on YouTube, available for the patients to see. This basically predates their normal appointment, where they would normally have a whole morning of sessions with different individuals involved in their care, nurses, anaesthetists, orthopedic surgeons, physiotherapists, occupational therapists. This is a short videos from each of those so that they can see those particular bits of information, and then they can ask the appropriate relevant questions when they actually see the clinicians when they go for their pre-op assessment clinic appointment. The problems-led follow-up by Mr. Starks in East was able to show that 93% of patients did not require a face-to-face follow-up following hip or knee arthroplasty, so following hip or knee replacement surgery. They were able to review at 1 year 93% of those patients without the need for them to come into hospital. So as you can imagine, that doesn't just save time, it saves travel, and it's a very green service. And the final one from me, before I pass over to Keith, is the post-operative review ownership by Mr. Hanna in a splitty Glenclwyd. He did a very good service with one of the physiotherapists in Glenclwyd, looking at how, as a multidisciplinary team, you could follow up post-operative patients more effectively. And they showed that they were able to, they had a backlog of about 1,000 patients because of COVID in the review category post-op. And in the space of 6 weeks, they were able to see 40% of those patients either virtually or over the telephone. So they're able to really take a chunk of that waiting list out by just being a bit innovative and changing the traditional methods of reviewing those patients with the same or better outcomes. Okay, I'm just going to click onto the next slide where Keith is going to take over.
Thank you. If you can carry on driving, though, I'll be grateful, Rob. So what Rob's described as a number of initiatives to improve the way that we work. Those initiatives will be implemented as in trial basis in some areas that Rob's described, but we'll have, if successful, and many of those are, and as has been described already, will have long-term implications about how we work. And the GIRF challenge, I think, just to iterate, is looking at best practice across a range of organisations across the UK, and encouraging us, and use that word advisor, but really encouraging us to do things differently, to get greater efficiencies out of the limited resources that we have. And that's really important because of the number of patients we are trying to treat going forward with the backlog that we have, which has been going on for some time. So that aside, what we obviously need to do is, we're an awful lot of people on our waiting list who actually need some kind of surgery or treatment. The good news is, after the lengthy period of the pandemic, a slight respite, I suppose, in the second half of last year, then the Omicron surge, we have started elective orthopaedic activity in the Health Board. So we have restarted at the beginning of this month in Central and our Abergele site. We have started this week in Wrexham on a limited basis, but that will expand during the next 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll get back to a pre-COVID level of activity in terms of the numbers of beds we have available by the end of the financial year. And we're due to restart on the West site in Bangor next week. I think it's important to say, one of the problems we have with orthopaedic surgery, more than most surgical specialties, it's usually the one that's most affected by the increase in winter or COVID emergency pressures. We have, as an organisation, always prioritise those patients who have cancer or other life-threatening conditions, and have treated them as a priority, as you would expect. And while orthopaedic patients have varying degrees of complexities, most of those patients have conditions which cause them pain, and conditions which cause them difficulty in living their normal lifestyle. But unfortunately, in terms of comparison to, say, a cancer patient, the procedures are not life-threatening. So they are usually the most greatly affected group of patients when winter pressures start, and that has certainly been the case during the pandemic. So the benefit of opening the Abergele Hospital is that we have a physical separation, an uncoupling, if you like, between this planned care facility and the main hospital in the central region. And that gives us the ability to start operating fairly much uninterrupted, with a guaranteed supply of beds and theatres for the foreseeable future. That said, there is that slight health warning at the end of this slide. The building itself has a limited lifespan due to its infrastructure, but in terms of its ability to be used for the next few years, certainly, it certainly gives us that facility. So we will focus on that. Rob, could you move on to the next slide, please, if you wouldn't mind? Thank you. So what we need to be able to do, though, is build on that, because while we have this particular site in Abergele, which is protected, when we reopen facilities in both Bangor and Wrexham, we know that while that may be quite safe to do, and we can guarantee getting some elective work through over the next 6 to 7 months, we'll also recognise that in practice, winter will come back again. And there is a likelihood that there will be further pressure on our beds due to medical emergencies, and that's regardless of whether there's another COVID surge or not. So what we're trying to do is increase our infrastructure. So back to Abergele, what we are looking to, because we do have the physical space there, is to expand the Abergele facility, take into account what I've just said about the infrastructure, the estate in there, and actually put a modular unit in there for orthopaedic activity, encompassing a number of beds, probably 30, and 2 theatres. That would augment the Abergele facility to make it a very meaningful orthopaedic site for a number of years, probably up to 5 years. That's really quite important, because that starts to give us a real ability to plan and start to make some serious inroads into our elective waiting list. That's still a business case. We're still looking at the practicalities and the financial aspects of that, but I think it's become a very attractive option for the organisation. That could be seen in isolation, or we're also looking whether we can expand our facilities and protect those facilities in both the west and the east. So the potential to have a modular ward in addition to that at Abergele in Bangor, and a facility which wouldn't be a modular ward, it'd be refurbishment in Wrexham, would also then give us a greater ability to protect orthopaedic activity going forward, aside from winter pressures. There is further work there involved for 2 reasons. One is obviously, as you do anything like this, it's an expensive operation to deliver. There is also quite a lengthy time lag involved. If we were to find the money tomorrow, it will probably take us at least 6 months to put a modular unit into place and get it operational. So there's some factors there. The other concern we have is both on the Bangor and the Wrexham sites, because the additional facilities would be linked to the main hospitals. There would still be a potential problem if we had a very bad winter, COVID or not COVID related. We might still lose that capacity to emergency pressures. Rob, if you may, next one. So we're talking about now is a sort of short-term solution with the Abergele option, the restart of elective orthopaedic activities I described. Medium-term solutions, 2 to 5 years around Abergele plus potentially Wrexham and Bangor. But our long-term solution, which is well supported at the moment by Welsh Government, are developments of regional treatment centres. And regional treatment centres were initially identified as being the solution for outpatient activity, day case surgery, and diagnostics across a range of surgical and some medical specialties. The benefit being that they are purpose-built, state-of-the-art, and become very good places for people to be treated without, again, the impact of some of the emergency pressures. That said, because of the orthopaedic waiting list, the design and business case are now focusing on including inpatient orthopaedic services in I say both, because we are now looking at the option of whether there should be 1 regional treatment centre or 2, and that's being considered as we speak. But orthopaedic inpatient activity would be featured in that plan. And the reason for that is it's just a simple volume of patients that we have to treat. So as it says there on the thing, these would provide a cold site, so they would be exempt. They would be separate from the main DGHs and therefore from winter pressures. They would deal with high activity levels. So these will be the more straightforward cases. Those are more complexity or requiring potential support from intensive care facilities would not go into the regional treatment centre. But the vast majority of people on our waiting list are waiting for routine procedures. So particularly for orthopedics, we will get through a lot of patients, and it will be a sustainable solution. As I say, it will be state of the art in terms of the facilities. Many of our hospital buildings have need of repair and have done some time. And they have the potential that we could put all routine elective orthopaedic surgery in North Wales into those 1 or 2 centres. There are practicalities of that if we were to have 1 or indeed 2, because we'd have to work out the precise location, and obviously there might be some travel involved for some patients. But that's the detail that we have to get into at this stage. And then the case mix issue is what I've referred to, is that those patients with some complexities or other clinical conditions would probably still be seen in the main hospital sites, but those routine will be seen in the regional treatment centres. I think there is worth a health warning, which is the final statement. Even with all that we've described, both currently, the medium term, and then the long term, it is likely that it will take us up to 3 years to clear the orthopaedic waiting list. Rob, that's it? Thank you. And then thank you for your time and patience, and we can now take any questions there might be.
Councillor Chris, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So we'll open the floor up to members, and are there any questions? All right, first hand I see is Councillor Liz Roberts.
Thank you very much indeed for your comprehensive presentation. An awful lot to take in there. I would really appreciate having a copy of that presentation, if I may, please. I speak as a long-trained orthopaedic nurse, so I'm very interested to see what you are planning to do in North Wales, and it's been a long time coming. And I like where you discuss about expert physiotherapy care post-operative, because I think this is much needed. I know from a personal experience, my husband was getting some treatment in Colwyn Bay Hospital, but it wasn't with a physiotherapist, you know, it was with a technician. And many a time, they didn't get that individual attention that I think that they should get. And so I'm very pleased to see what you have got planned. I am really, really pleased. And the other is, I think patients who are waiting for elective surgery tend to say, no, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. I can't move. And they don't realize that they're making it worse for themselves post-op because they've not been using their muscles prior to the surgery. So anything you can do in that aspect would be really marvelous. And I'm just going to, are you going to be using less on Rob Jones and Agnes Hunt if you are going to be doing all of this in North Wales? And my other question is, we have an Alter-G machine, the anti-gravity in Arias, which Conwy and Betsy bought in partnership. I'd like to know how much use is made of that. And if not, can more use be made of it? Because, you know, as you know, I mean, for members to know, I've had people in wheelchairs there get out of their wheelchairs, go onto the machine and be able to walk and run very slowly on it, which is absolutely marvelous. But I'd like to see more use made of that machine, if there's any possibility, please. Thank you very much.
So if I may, Chair, I'll come in and answer a couple of the more general questions. I think Rob's more qualified than I to answer the more detailed questions. So on the very simple one, copy of the presentation, I think Jane's got a copy, so we're very happy for that to be circulated to all members. Secondly, in terms of sort of repatriating work from Robert Jones, etc., our first port of call, I think, will be to treat our existing backlog, but at some stage in the future we will have to consider, and will consider, the work and those patients that actually go across the border and to other organisations. I think it would be fair to say that we would need, and we've got such a large backlog in orthopaedics, we need to focus on those numbers first. But during that 3 to 5 year period that we've been talking about, then we will be picking up those conversations about how we address those particular issues. What I wouldn't want to do is, I think, it's overload our regional treatment centres before they even started. I think so there's a stage. But Rob, you may want to answer some of those more clinical questions.
Do the Councillor Liz Robertson, Councillor Bradfield, do those questions pertain to something that Keith has just said, or do you want to wait till after I've answered some of the ones already?
My question's got nothing to do with that, because Liz talked through medical experience. I come from a welfare angle, and I wonder, with your permission, Chair, to ask, is there a danger of our National Health Service becoming a two-tier service as privatisation becomes more and more to the fore? I speak because one of my welfare people has waited 15 years for a knee replacement. She gets injections 3 times a week, and I don't know how many tablets she's on. But she lost her relation in December, and she decided to go private in January, and she gets a knee replacement in March. I think, and she's a lovely lady, I think, wow, money talks. What happens if this lady never was left money? She would need to go through the pain and agony, not being able to get out, using a mobility scooter, right enough. But I just fear that the way the world's going and the way this country's going, it's money orientated, and I'm afraid when it comes to circumstances like this, money talks. But I do thank you, Robert, and I do thank you, Keith, for coming along this evening and talking to members. And it's good to listen to members bringing up the different experiences of the people they meet and the people they represent. Thank you, Chair.
If I may, Chair, I might just respond to that. I mean, I understand the question that you ask about the financial and private view of healthcare. All I can say, representing the Health Board, is that we are committed to get our NHS waiting list down to a manageable level, which is why we're working with Welsh Government to get the regional treatment centres established, funded, and they will have a long-term, they will create a long-term facility for us to manage those waiting lists, not just in orthopaedics, but across a whole range of surgical specialties, and take the pressure off our district general hospitals on 3 sites so that they can manage the unscheduled care, i.e. the emergency work, better. So I think there is an absolute commitment to deliver an NHS solution for NHS patients. That said, of course, in reality, there will be some patients on long waiting lists who will choose to go, even in that period, to choose to take a private option. And that is obviously their choice. But I think as a health board, we remain committed to provide an NHS solution, and at a point in time in the future, with a waiting time for treatment, which is actually appropriate, not at the time it is now.
Chair, just to finish, I thank you for that answer, Keith. Is it possible you could come back to this meeting and say 6 months or 8 months and tell us just how much the waiting list has reduced?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers, Keith.
Okay, Mr. Crane, would you like to complete your responses?
Yeah, thank you. So as regards the anti-G machine, I don't know the specific answer to how much it's been used. Whether it's been used, I can find out, and I can certainly come back with a response. I can say that the use of various allied health professionals, not just physiotherapists, in all specialities in the NHS is increasing, because it has to, because we don't have enough doctors, and we're valuing the use of other clinicians as well, and they definitely have their role in improving the health and the pathway and the journey of the patient. Certainly with orthopedics, physiotherapy has its role both post-op and pre-op, and I can certainly, my background is physiotherapy, so I would say that, but I can definitely say the same for podiatry with regard to orthopedics for the foot and ankle, and I can certainly say the same for occupational therapy, or lots of other remits of orthopedics as well. And I know that in Betsi Cadwaladr we are increasing the use of all of those professions in the orthopedic pathway, which I'm very pleased to see.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Yes, I would be interested to know how much the NHS are using the Alta-G, please, because I was very much involved in its purchase. So I'm the Armed Forces champion, and I realised how much they use it in rehabilitation within the Armed Forces, and that's how we came to purchasing it. So I'd like to see it being used to its, its full capability, really. So thank you very much indeed. And I agree with Frank to come back and speak to us. 6 months, 12 months would be absolutely wonderful. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor James Listed.
Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr iawn, and thank you to Mr. Kane and Mr. Dibble for coming along this evening to share their presentation. Just a very quick question, really. I think it's more for Mr. Kane. I'm interested, really, to see how many patients within the Betsi Cadwaladr Health Board area get maybe transferred over to the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital, because obviously we know that's a specialist hospital in orthopaedic. And I'm just wondering, do Gwynedd and Glenclwyd still have possible outpatients with the consultants from Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt over in this area, saves the patients travelling over to the Robert Jones Agnes Hunt Hospital. Speaking from a personal point of view as well, with some musculoskeletal problems.
I don't have the exact figures for you. Again, with the anti-gravity machine, I can find out and come back to you. We are still using those services. In some cases, because we have to, because they're tertiary centres or they're centres of excellence, and we can't necessarily provide that level of care in our own health board. And sometimes it's a case of meeting the demand, okay, with the extra capacity of sending those patients to those services. But I'll certainly come back to you with numbers.
And just to come back on that, recently I know of somebody that's had an experience where they were treated at the Robert Jones Agnes Hunt Hospital a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and they had a reoccurrence of a problem that they've had recently, but they had to go through their GP, and their GP had to write to the Betsi Cadwaladr Health Board instead of being able to bypass them and go straight back to the consultant they saw at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt. Would that be something that could be under review to try and drive those numbers waiting list down? Because if a patient's already been seen in Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, there's obviously a waiting list then again of getting through to get. I'm guessing it's a funding thing because you're going from one health board to another as well.
Yeah.
Go on, Rob.
I was just going to clarify the process, so that the process is, under normal circumstances, that the GP would write to the what we call the CMATs, which is the musculoskeletal triage mechanism within the health board. Yeah. And they would then determine whether the need of that particular patient would require sending external to the health board. Okay, so it's based on, under normal circumstances, based on the patient's need. If it could be provided by a clinician within the health board, then generally speaking it's managed within the health board for lots of reasons, not just financial, but regarding travel and having a greener service, and just the fact that we can manage it locally. That's the process that has always happened, and yes, I'm sure that there is a large part of that decision making is funding, and I'm sure there's probably a number per month that can be referred. But there's also the section which you alluded to, Councillor Listed, that patients that have had care under organisations such as Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, then there is some kind of avenue that in lots of cases they can continue that care if it's the same episode of care. I have to clarify that, but That's my understanding.
Okay.
Keith might be able to.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, I think it obviously depends on the particular patient and their condition. But normally when the specialist intervention has been completed, ongoing care will be passed back to a local hospital or provider, i.e. to the health board. And that's often for practical purposes. I guess a patient, if they required long-term follow-up, if that can be managed locally, so avoiding the travel, that's probably desirable. There will be some small number, I think, where you might have that ongoing care at the specialist unit. But in most cases, when we refer patients out for a period for treatment and some follow-up or whatever that might be, the patient would come back to the health board for their ongoing care. And or if they've been discharged back to their GP, then unfortunately the process then does require for a re-referral. And that's partly because otherwise patients will just sit on a waiting list for no obvious reason. But there will be some patients who need to be reviewed on a constant basis, whether it's once a year, once for 2 years, whatever it might be. But that will be the standard process for any specialist unit.
Many thanks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I don't see any further questions. I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask myself. In terms of the, you mentioned 2 theatres at Abergele. Is that 2 additional theatres, or will that be 2 in total?
So no, so what we've got at the moment are 2 theatres within the existing infrastructure. So they're linked to the ward block.
Yeah.
If the modular unit is approved, funded, etc., then there will be 2 additional theatres. So that will give us 4.
So that'll give us 4.
But I have to say the if bit, the modular ward is not yet approved. I mean, there will need to be planning permission.
Yeah.
So there are a number of complications to go through, but that will be our hope. So then it'll give us 4 theatres and somewhere in the region of 40 beds, which is a reasonable resource to work with for the number of patients we're looking at. So
that's great. And you mentioned, is this how are you going to fund this if you're successful? Is that this out of your own capital resources, or will this be in partnership with Welsh Government?
But it's partly in partnership with Welsh Government. So we've had a significant investment for planned care recovery in its broadest sense, both in the last financial year, but going forward with a commitment this year and the following year. We will be using some of that fund to do this. We also have a number of other arrangements which we have in place already. So for orthopedics, we send a number of patients to the Spire Hospital in Birkenhead. We would cease that arrangement at some stage during this year if that modular ward option came to pass. So we would not need to send patients quite as far, and we would then use the money that we've been putting into that process to fund the modular ward. It does become quite complicated, and I wouldn't try to bore you with that, but what we have to try and balance is obviously the need to treat a large number of patients as quickly as we can with the funding that we've got available. We have to make some hard choices in that regard, which is why we're also looking at how we work to make us more efficient and effective in treating those patients. So some of the practices that Rob described around prehabilitation, if patients are better prepared for surgery, their length of stay in hospital is reduced, and therefore you can see more patients through the beds that you've got. So it's that kind of economy of scale.
Yeah, you've actually touched on my final question, which was going back a few years. We ran Welsh Government, Conway, and Betsy ran a trial using the exercise by referral scheme, the National Exercise by Referral Scheme, to ensure that people had that pre-op activity. They were supported with professionals to get that bit fitter, improve their mobility, improve their dexterity, whatever was needed. And my understanding was that we did have better outcomes, but that was never actually, for one reason or another, it never moved on into a cohesive service. Is that something that might be an option moving forward in bearing in mind what you've said about trying to ensure you improve pre-op people's pre-op physical abilities in order to improve their post-op prospects?
I think in general terms, and Rob, well, Rob's going to just answer the question more directly. I'm going to say, because of this whole process of reviewing how we do things, the GERFS approach and all those things, they become into a sort of one big package of support mechanisms for patients. So yes, we absolutely need to explore that. We will be looking to things that we've either done before and can make more cohesive as a package across our ways in this, or looking at good practice across other organisations. You know, the NHS is very good at reinventing itself, so we need to look at good, things that work well in Wales, in England, wherever. So I think Rob answered that much more succinctly than I did by saying yes. I think this is a short answer.
Yeah, well, it's basically that we do need to work better with the National Exercise Referral Scheme. The lifestyle management program, which I talked a little bit about in the presentation, is part and parcel of the National Exercise Referral Scheme. But as with lots of services, they scaled down when they restarted when they restarted during the latter stages of COVID. They were scaled down because of the maximum occupancy you could have in a gymnasium or in a given space. And they still haven't scaled back up to pre-COVID levels, and they will. And they're also being conducted differently. They're being conducted virtually as well, which is a help, but it's not, as you know, it's not quite the same as being in a gymnasium with an instructor in person. And those kind of things are going to restart. Now, I know the benefit of the National Exercise Referral Scheme for lots of different conditions, particularly orthopedic conditions. And I am very keen to see it restart at least back to where it was pre-COVID. And I think we need to be looking at much, not better, but a lot of different ways of using it and linking in with the local councils that provide it better than what we were doing before, because there was definitely it wasn't a seamless service before. It needs to become more seamless. So I'm keen to see that happen.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I've got a hand up again. It's Councillor Liz again.
Thanks very much. Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the National Referral Scheme, because it's an excellent scheme, that is. But I don't know whether, when my husband needed it this last time, he had to go through a GP. Well, before, any member of the primary healthcare team could make that referral. And I wonder whether we could go back to that, because it's easier to see someone from the primary healthcare team than the actual GP themselves. I don't know whether or not that is a possibility. I don't know, but I would love to see that come back and make it a lot more accessible. I, as a health visitor, used to do it frequently, and it worked extremely well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if Rob knows the answer. I don't know the answer to that process. What I will say is that we're reviewing our pathways, and that sounds awfully jargonistic, but the whole process of patient referral from primary care right through the whole assessment process, through secondary care, treatment, and everything else. So some of those things will be picked up. In fact, we've got a workshop tomorrow on some of those aspects already. So it's an ongoing process, but I don't know the answer specifically on your question unless Rob does.
No, my knowledge was and still is that the last time I looked into it, anybody, any health practitioner could refer, and I think that still is the case. I wouldn't like to comment on individual cases. Perhaps that there may have been a reason why the GP needed to fill this form out specifically for your partner. Was it? I don't know, but to my knowledge, it still is any clinical practitioner can complete the forms.
It is the GP practice. That's what it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I've got no further hands up, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you both for coming to present to us today. I think it's been a really interesting presentation, and I am really buoyed by some of the points you've raised and some of the comments you've raised, particularly around the potential expansion to 4 theatres at Abergele, because, as you know, we have an ageing population in this part of North Wales, and there is something which is growing, which has been growing even before COVID, the need for orthopaedic services. So we certainly welcome that, and I also welcome the suggestion that's been made with regards to coming back to visit this committee in maybe 8 to 12 months' time. So we'll ask our officers if they can contact your office and try and arrange that through the Forward Work programme. But in terms of as there's no further questions, you're more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting if you'd like, but I'm sure you have other pressing things which you need to get done. But we need to move on to the next item on the agenda. But in doing so, we first need to note the report and the presentation from Betsy Cadwallader. So somebody
propose, Chair.
Councillor James, and seconded by Councillor Frank. Thank you. Can you all show in favour? Just that show of hands will do. That's fine. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to item 6, which...
Well, can we thank you for your time today, and we very much welcome the opportunity to present to you and talk to you, and we will welcome the further invite at future time to suit yourselves. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Right. So we will now move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the North Wales Population Needs Assessment Draft Report, to be presented by Jenny Williams, the Strategic Director for Social Care and Education, and Mark Bowler, the Service Manager for Quality Standards and Commissioning. Mark, are you leading on this, or is Jenny going to open? And
I think just in the spirit of time, I'm not going to say too much, just introduce the paper, and thanks to Mark again for, as you know, we have to respond to the requirements in legislation to undertake a needs assessment of our service users and ensure that we engage with the community and the public. So this is just going to talk you through our approach this time, which is very much a regional approach. Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
I think it is important to advise members. This is a fantastic piece of work which Mark and the team have pulled together, but it isn't as comprehensive as it would normally be, because a lot of the organisations that would feed into this have been redirected towards addressing COVID, and a lot of the statistics that we would normally see within the report are currently not available. But that said, I'll hand over to Mark, who will talk you through the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Those of you who've been around a little while or a few years will have seen this sort of thing before. This is the second population needs assessment that has been produced. Like Councillor Chris said there, this is a regional piece of work. So this assessment is covering the whole of the North Wales region, and it's been produced jointly by the 6 local authorities and by the local health board. It answers a statutory requirement as part of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, but more than that, it is actually a very useful piece of work for us to understand or attempt to understand some of the needs of the population, so that off the back of this, then we can start to put together our strategies. It's a very strategic piece of work, and it is quite lengthy. The content of the report is quite prescribed within the legislation, so it has to cover themes such as children, young people. It has to talk about older people. It has to talk about health, physical disability. So there's a list of different subjects that we have to cover, which is why the report ends up being quite lengthy. But hopefully it does a reasonable amount of justice to each of those themes. Like Councillor Chris just said, we haven't been able this year to get all the information that we would normally. And I think in particular, there's a lot of data that is missing and quite a bit of analysis that is missing that we would normally like to have within the report, but it's just not been available because of the COVID pandemic. But what hopefully, if members have had a look through the report, they will see that there is an awful lot of engagement that has still been able to go on, both with the members of the public, with different organisations, and with staff within our own organisation as well. This is not going to sit in isolation, this report. It's actually the first, hopefully, of three that you will see. The population needs assessment is the first stage. After that, you will be getting probably around June or July time something that is called a market stability report, which will take the information within this and then look at how well is the market out there, both the private and public sector, being able to meet and deliver for the needs that are set out within this report. And then the third report that hopefully will be coming later on this year will be the local authorities' local commissioning strategy, which is our strategy of how we're going to address the needs of the population and any issues that come out of the market stability report. So this is the first stage of three that you will receive going forwards, hopefully this year. The report that you've got does have to be, like I said, it is quite prescribed in the legislation. It has to be signed off by all 6 local authorities and by the local health board. So unfortunately today this is for your information, but any thoughts, considerations, anything that you feel needs to be taken into account, we will take it away. But it won't be able to be included in time for the publication of this report, but it will feed into future work that we will do. And that's only apologise just because of the timescales involved in getting this through the 6 local authorities and the local health board by the 31st of March. So needed you to be aware of that. In section 3 of the covering report, I've attempted to do you a summary of some of the key findings. It doesn't really do justice to the large report and the amount of work that has gone on, but I've tried to pick out some of the key points for you. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just run through some of those now, so you're getting a good flavour of what is in the report. So the first thing the report looks at is children and young people. And Conway has seen a decrease in the number and rate of children who need care and support against increases that have been seen throughout the rest of Wales. And I think this is quite significant. It has been reported to scrutiny before, and we feel that this is a reflection on the emphasis that we've placed in Conway on our preventative work and the supporting work that we've done for families. And I think it's something that we are pleased about. The report recognises the importance of good mental health for children, and it raises concerns from all the consultations that are in there about access to mental health services for children. Not just an issue for Conway, but an issue for the whole of North Wales. The report recognises the massive staffing issues, challenges that are faced by children's services, both in Conway and across the rest of North Wales, and the concerns around a lot of annual nature of grant funding for the preventative services. Much of our preventative services are funded through grants with staff on annual contracts. Concerns are raised again from the consultations around the availability of key services to children and young people during the COVID pandemic. Many of the paediatric services that families rely on have had to be stopped or postponed, and it names things like speech and language therapy and physiotherapy, things like that. And then finally, picked up on the fact that concerns have been raised around the disruption to education support systems and social activities in the COVID pandemic that have meant people have spent a lot more time at home. And we know that there is a small number of children within our population who are exposed to adverse childhood experiences and are particularly vulnerable because of the COVID pandemic. Moving on to older people, Conway has already seen an increase in the number of over 65s by 15%. We've been talking about this for as long as I've been in Conway, we are starting to see it. So 15% is 5,000 more people over the age of 65 since 2010 live in our area. And as it continues, we can expect to see a further increase of 24%. So more than 10,000 more people over the age of 65 will live in our area. While we do have a generally more healthy older population than other parts of Wales, the numbers needing care support are increasing just because the number of people over the age of 65 is increasing so significantly. We are seeing that, and we are seeing the impact that has on our services. A high proportion of older people in our local authority area do live alone, 59% according to the report, which is a staggering figure. And it does raise concerns around loneliness and isolation and the impact that can have, and of course heightened significantly by the COVID pandemic over the last 2 years. And the report also recognises that it's not just people living alone that are suffering loneliness and isolation. It does talk about the impact that the pandemic has had on older people who live in our care homes and the number of lockdowns that they've been subject to. The report notes that poor health, obviously not inevitable as you get older, and it has particular attention on the preventative services and that area of work. And it's important to remember the contribution that our older people have as carers and volunteers within the local community. The report recognises the importance of digital inclusion for older people and the recent increases in the use of digital technology to access all kinds of things, from health and social care services to all kinds of services, even more so within the COVID pandemic, and the risk that some older people could be left behind through a lack of digital inclusion. The report does talk about dementia services, and it was estimated in 2017 that there were 2,400 people in Conway with dementia, and this is expected to increase by 60% over the next, by 2035. Evidence suggests that cases of dementia in old age can be prevented through lifestyle changes. So the report does talk about that quite a bit, and raises concerns around the provision of support for people with dementia, from adaptations in the home through to the acute support that is required. And then again, as with children's services, the report talks about the significant staffing issues and challenges that have been faced by the older people services in North Wales, those employed by the local authorities, the health board, and also those private organisations. Many organisations are struggling with recruitment and retention of staff and are unable to deliver the level of service that is needed as a result. Moving on to physical impairment and sensory loss, the report notes that Conway, as of all the local authorities in North Wales, has the highest number of residents who are registered with a physical or sensory disability, including the highest rate with sight loss, the highest rate registered blind, and the highest rate for those with moderate, severe and profound hearing impediments. There's estimated to be over 1,000 residents in Conway who have dual sensory loss as well. It recognises the impact of poor mental health on those with chronic physical health problems, and how it's even more of prevalent amongst those people. Respondents to the consultations flagged issues around accessing public spaces, public transport, and other public facilities such across the region and in Conway. And in the consultations as well, respondents flagged concerns about accessing information from public organisations being in the right format, so that they're able to access it. So people with sensory loss, it's been exaggerated more as more and more services have gone online. The digital online media is sometimes worse than the printed media that they had access to before. For those with learning disabilities, there are 590 with a learning disability in Conway, which has seen an 11% increase over the last 5 years. and the report recognises national research that those with learning disability tend to experience worse health and have a greater need for care and support. From the consultations, adults with learning disabilities identified the need for more opportunities for work experience, more opportunities for training, and identified lots of barriers when accessing different facilities, leisure facilities, and things like that. Those consultations are North Wales based. Looking at autism, the report notes that there are 1,100 people in Conway over the age of 18 with autism, and the numbers are slowly increasing in line with the population increases. Parents and carers identified the need for more respite services and raised concerns that so many of the groups that they rely on had closed because of the COVID pandemic. Scrolling down a bit, looking at mental health, obviously we know that this is a concern. There are an estimated 15,000 people in Conway who are predicted to have a common mental health problem. In the National Survey for Wales, 9% of the respondents in North Wales reported that they'd been treated for mental health. And the report suggests that such a high proportion of people don't seek help. Respondents to the consultations noted that they felt that more early intervention was needed and beneficial, and so should be widely available to help avoid people reaching that point of crisis. The report identifies the importance of unpaid care, and there are estimates that 12% of the population of Wales are unpaid carers, and could increase to 16% by 2037. People aged 50 to 64 are the most likely to provide unpaid care, but Conway does have a large number of young carers registered as well, over 400 young carers in the county. And then the report recognises the importance of respite services for those who are providing unpaid care. And as a region, the importance to link in with the vision for respite care and short breaks in Wales. Finally, the previous population assessment did have a lot of information on veterans and a chapter dedicated to veterans. This assessment, it just hasn't been possible, unfortunately, so there's minimal information available, and it doesn't do justice to that part of our population, which is unfortunate. So then the cover report then details a lot more information. It talks you through some of the engagement and consultation that has gone on, that you can see there. And like I said, the report has been produced regionally on behalf of the 6 local authorities and the local health board. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour of what's in there, but it definitely hasn't done justice to it all.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. I think it does show how difficult it has been to collate the information, but there are some really important and really key points in the report which I think that we need to look at going forward, and perhaps some additional work for this scrutiny committee in the future. I'll open it up to debate now, and the first speaker is Councillor Liz Roberts, followed by Councillor Frank Bradfield.
Thanks very much indeed, Mark. You could spend all evening and more discussing this very comprehensive document. And I looked through it, but I'm going to have to look through it quite a few times to take it all in. And yeah, I noted the one sentence on veterans, which, you know, quite naturally I would look up. But as the North Wales Armed Forces chairman, I would like to meet with you really, and to look at, you know, how we can collate figures, how best we do it. Of course, the census will make a difference because the question on veterans is being asked in the census. So that'll be interesting to see what our grouping is, if you like, within North Wales. And so, yes, I would love to have a chat with you, please, how we can collate these figures, and I will do that. I can see the indices for ACEs increasing following the COVID pandemic because it's had an effect in so many ways, hasn't it? A question I want to raise, you talk about adaptations in the home, and I'm wondering, how much use you're making of the LoRaWAN system that our innovative team in IT are using. I'm using it very much in the community, and I'm just wondering, how much use is being made of it in social care. And we talk about chronic physical health. Well, I do hope that from our last presentation that, we can see some improvements in orthopedic care and in helping people to be more physically active following either pre or post-operative treatment. The Public Health Board, put together the wellbeing needs assessment. How much joint working is there between the Regional Partnership Board and Public Health Board, and how do these two assessments gel together and to work in partnership? And then the other one is, yes, we're going to see some huge effects, if you like, in the next few years of how our younger generation has been affected by the COVID pandemic. The ones who've lost schooling, the ones who were in that last year of schooling and who really, it's left some of them in a very, in a real predicament, really. So yes, it'll be interesting to see in 5 years to come what the next population needs assessment shows us. So if you just have an answer to one or two, I think it was one question I raised, was it about the LoRaWAN?
Okay.
Shall I try? I'm not even sure what you're talking about, Liz, if I'm brutally honest. It's Claire here, Claire Higgins, Head of Integrated Adults. Sorry.
I will phone you up, Claire, and I will tell you about the LoRaWAN.
Okay, my head's been in Eunice all day today, so really sorry.
It's our innovative team in IT, and it's like web sensors. And I see I have mentioned it to the team that they ought to be speaking to yourselves, because I think you can make some good use of those sensors and keep it in-house as well, really, in what we're trying to develop.
Okay, well, we have had a conversation with Neil Payne around the development of technology. So, and he did ask me, I think it was just as the Omicron hit us, if now was a good time to have a conversation about doing some more development locally. And obviously it wasn't. So we can pick that up, Liz. Yeah, so it'd be really interesting to have a conversation with you offline, and then I can pick it up with Neil as well.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
No problem.
And on the links between the PSB and the Regional Partnership Board, there's many joint meetings taking place between those producing the population needs assessment and those who are producing the, I can't remember what it's called now, wellbeing assessment. Is it called? Yeah. There's been we've done a lot of joint work. So a lot of the engagement and consultation work has been joint, and all of the information has been shared both ways. So it should feature within both.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Right, our next speaker is Councillor Frank Bradfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark. Your presentation was excellent. You hit every one of my notes here that to me is important, where you mentioned the 590 children with learning difficulties. That's a start, but it's actually more than a start, that we could have developed the 15,000 with mental health. Once again, that's a start, but there's different degrees of mental health. You mentioned the veterans, and I was pleased, or Liz mentioned veterans, I was pleased about that. But on page 10, you wrote, or the report wrote, a consultation has been carried out with the local elected members and the appropriate members champion, whose observation are as follows. And then you have non-applicable. It's not non-applicable because every member has got a history, every member has got an interest, a trade, a qualification. So I would have thought delete that, because if somebody else reads that report, they'll think that the champion for mental health, the champion for old age people, old age pensioners, disability was not interested, and that's not the case. For veterans, if you had wrote to me about veterans, I would have told you about the loneliness, the disabilities, the welfare issues of benefits of health, of financial matters, debt, employment. All these things are related to our veterans who Liz rightly represents. So I welcome the report. I think it's one of the best reports I've ever read. It covers everything and it's excellent, but I think you should involve members when you do say you write to them, write to them. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Roger. Do you want to unmute, Councillor Roger?
Sorry, Chair. I get the impression that social service is having to firefight to keep abreast of need. On page 73, it states many services are not fully funded. I'd like to know why they're not fully funded. And also, longer term funding is required to provide sustained support to young people. So I'm actually talking about sustained support, if you could explain that as well. Thank you.
Okay, shall I give it a go, Councillor Roger? Thank you. Okay, so in terms of our funding, I think one of the things that people will know is that there's a growth in services, a growth in demand, and sadly, that means there's a growth needed in terms of budgets. A lot of what we do in terms of our prevention services are funded through grants, and they're funded through, which are on a rolling cycle as such. So we've had the Flying Start and Families First grant for over a decade now, and we've had ICF funding, so intermediate care funding for nearly a decade. And these monies aren't in the settlement that we get into the local authority. So in terms of sustaining services, we can't plan on a sustainable footprint. So we have to year on year think about how we can continue to provide alternative services if that funding at any point is pulled. So that's one of the issues for us, as well as the issue in terms of demand. So what was the other bit of the question that you asked for? Have I answered it?
Longer term funding is required to provide sustained support to young people.
So that's the bit about actually, we're planning on a cycle basis. We don't have that. It doesn't come into the council settlement. We get a grant. We know we're going to get the grant every 2 or 3 years, but we don't know whether we're going to get it in the next round, if that makes any sense. So we know Families Flying Start now, we know we're going to get it for the next 3 years. We can plan on a 3-year basis, but we don't know whether we'll get it after that. And we don't know how much we'll get after that. At least this time around, they have told us, Welsh Government have told us how much grant we're going to get for the next 3 years, giving us an idea in terms of the value that we're going to get in an increase on a year-on-year basis. But we don't get that into the settlement. And to some extent, you could say that's a good thing, because obviously when we have to put forward our cuts for our as part of the budget cycle process, those services, we can't put those services forward because they're funded through grants, so they're protected to some extent from what we're doing. An awful lot of what we do is done through grants.
Thank you. It's just that, Claire, that need, as far as all the people are concerned, it's really, really increasing, and I find it, I'm not being critical with you people, but I find it that knowing that the Welsh Government knows there's an issue about older people, etc., they should do a little bit more to help to sustain policy in respect of older people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you'll have heard before Mark mentioned dementia and our figures around dementia. As part of the ICF Intermediate Care Fund that we've had, the grant that we've had around that, we've had a specific bit around dementia services that's enabled us to develop quite innovative approaches for dementia. So we've got a support work process where it's quite a different approach to how we would normally support older people, and it's working really, really well. Now we know that for the next, I think it's 3 or 4 years, 3 years, we know we're going to have that funding going forward, so we can plan that team and we can offer that stability really in terms of that service provision. But yeah, you're right. You know, there's an issue, isn't there, in terms of the balance of the budget versus the growth of demand, and we have an ageing population in Conway.
Not only that, as one gets older, there is the issue of complex needs as well, which is another issue as far as money is concerned. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. There are no further hands up. Oh, Councillor Frank. Can you unmute, Councillor Frank? So you seem to have muted yourself again, Frank.
Sometimes it's better to be muted. I was thanking Roger for his points, because Roger always makes excellent points. And Betsy Cadwaladr realised that the social services in Conway are not struggling financially, but have difficulties meeting the burden that's placed upon the social services, and members should realise that, because we spoke about mental health, we spoke about ALN, and we spoke about veterans. All these people are in the growth area, so therefore it follows that we need to follow the growth area if we're going to look after it. It's not the fault of Conway Borough Council that this lovely place in North Wales is wanted to live in by so many people who are aged over 65, which Mark kindly pointed out. He could have said over 85, because that is also, and when we go for the settlement, they don't go for the need for looking after the aged and the ill. They go for families. So we're at a disadvantage, and I just wish that the people who represent us, the AMs, the MPs, would realise that this is an ageing population in Conway. It's not going to get any better. The only way it can get better is if they attack Ukraine and send a bomb across, because we are living longer, we're healthier, we need to rejoice in that. But once again, social services is pushed to look after those who fall ill or need support on the way. I do thank Jenny and her team for all the work they do, and I mean that sincerely. It is fantastic, but Betsy Cadwaladr is not the elephant in the room, because they assure me that they would support social services to work closer with them, and I thoroughly believe that, and that is the way forward. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Frank. And I think we all share your concern in terms of the formula. It doesn't support local authorities like ours, which have an ageing population. It's a historical anomaly within the formula, which has been there for many, many years. And I think we've all called on Welsh Government to enter into discussions with the WLGA to look at it. But we seem to have an impasse with the vast majority of larger counties across the WLGA, particularly South Wales authorities, not wanting to see that formula amended because it would have a negative impact on their budgets. So it needs a government solution to the problem.
Exactly.
The UK government have indicated that they have a plan, I've tried to look at that plan and I still don't know how it's going to fund things. We seem to be asking those people in most difficulty to fund their ongoing care rather than having a progressive taxation system that takes account of that. But I thank you for your contribution to the meeting, and thank Mark for the excellent presentation. I think what we need now is to propose. We need a proposer and a seconder, because this report needs to go to cabinet for approval and then on to council. So could somebody please propose that we recommend that cabinet approve the report?
Sorry, Councillor Chris, could I come in? Sorry, I have my hand up.
James.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you letting me speak, and thank you to Mark and to Jenny and to Claire and everyone in social care and health. You know, this last couple of years has not been by means a walk in the park at all. And I think it's fair to say that we all know the challenges that we face and are facing currently as well. And in terms of, you know, the formula side of things, we know that UK government have a plan, but also the pressure is also on Welsh government of how they come out with how they're going to work out a plan as well for the 22 local authorities, including our wonderful Conway County Borough Council. So I would like to propose that we note and we welcome this report today, and thank you to Mark and to Jenny and to the whole team in social care and health. And I would ask if that thanks can be minuted and passed on to all of our social care officers, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor James. I'm sure everyone will support that. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Roger. Thank you. Right, so we have the proposer and seconder. As this is now going to cabinet with a recommendation that cabinet approve the report, we will need to do a roll call. So I will ask the committee officer, Jane Jones, if she'll call out names and alphabetically, and will members advise whether they are for, against, or abstaining. Thank you. Over to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you, members. Councillor Frank Bradfield.
For.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
For.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Obliged.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor Wyn Ellis-Jones.
Diolch.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor James Lestard.
Obliged.
Councillor Roger Parry.
Oh.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Obliged.
Councillor Joan Vaughan. No. Councillor Aaron Wynne.
Obliged.
Okay, thank you, members. That was unanimous.
Thank you, everyone. That's approved. That will now go forward to cabinet with a recommendation to them to approve the report, and then it will go forward to council. Only for me to now close the meeting and to thank everyone for all their hard work, for all the work that's been put into producing the reports. That a significant report that we've had before us today, and to thank the staff from Betsy Cadwallader for coming and talking to us on the orthopaedic programme. And let's hope that we will have some significant improvements as that rolls forward. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Hwyl. Diolch.